All right, what's up, everybody? I'm here with Casey Adams. What's up, Casey?
What's going on, Sean? Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, you're in Denver right now?
Yeah, flew into Denver yesterday. Typically in LA at the studio, but coming live from Denver.
You travel a lot, huh?
Yeah, man. I mean, I think traveling now is different for everyone. This is actually a last minute trip. It's a little bit of snowboarding trip. I have my girlfriend's brother lives up here and he just moved here. Nice. So we're coming to check it out. But yeah, I like to say I travel a lot. I was just in Puerto Rico and Miami interviewing the mayor.
Right.
San Francisco with one of my buddies. So, traveling has been a huge part of my journey when it comes to networking and everything. So it's something I try to do often.
Yeah. It looks on your social media like you're like always traveling and going to cool places. So you've had like some awesome guests on your podcast I want to talk about. But like I'm interested in, so like the mayor of Miami, right? You had a cool podcast with him, talked about Bitcoin. It seemed like you went to him, like you went to him. Like, do you kind of have like a traveling show for your podcast, or like, how's that work?
Yeah. I mean, for the podcast, I started it 3 years ago when I was living in Virginia in my bedroom when I was 17. And for context, I'm 20 years old now. And, I live in LA now, and it's been a crazy journey, as we'll get into it. But the podcast has always been something that I started to make connections and to build relationships with high quality people. And it started off interviewing, good friends of mine, to the Larry Kings and Rick Rosses and the mayor of Miami. But something that I've always done that I think is incredible and I like to share with people is to just show up. And what I mean by that is something like the mayor of Miami, and I've done this for different people like Grant Cardone. I saw what was happening in Miami with the Miami tech scene and what was happening with him talking about Bitcoin and just this whole movement on Twitter. I was like, I want to interview him. And for me, like in-person interviews are always 10 times better because you get to shake their hand and you get to see them and they get to see you, and the content is much more. But I think for a lot of people the past year I've done hundreds of Zoom interviews and it's still amazing and there's so much quality content. But for someone like the mayor of Miami, bigger guy, I wanted to go out there and sit down with him in person. So, I reached out to his team. We start talking and I'm like, hey, I'll be in Miami next Wednesday at 2:00. Let me know if that works for you. I was giving them some times. And they're like, perfect, 2:00 works for us. For me, this is really what happened. I have no plans to go to Miami, and I end up just I book a flight and I show up, right? So and I've done that dozens of times with different people. And, I've invested not only time, money, and effort into these podcasts, but it's something that I've been obsessed with since I was 17 when it comes to
You told them you were going to be in
that.
Miami, but you weren't planning on being in Miami. But when he said, yeah, this works, they were like, oh yeah, I'm just in Miami. That's pretty chill. Yeah. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. And it works too. And people have done that for me when it comes to like people that want to fly out to LA or whatever it may be. Like I've told this story and I think it's worked. It's genuine. It's authentic. And yeah, I think just showing up, like the mayor of Miami, I showed up, I had the studio, we talked for 20, 25 minutes. He was a busy guy. But he'll remember me now. We've had conversations on Twitter and Instagram, and he remembers me as the guy that popped up in the office, had my setup within 5 minutes, and boom.
Yeah, you have like a microphone. You have like a microphone, and like you have the stuff to set up a podcast like on the go.
Yeah, I mean, I use like the Rodecaster board and like same mic you have, the Shure 400, I believe it is, and I travel with it. Sometimes it's a pain, but it's a good portable setup to make it high quality.
So you're walking into the mayor's office and you're like plugging stuff in and like setting it up.
100%.
And dang, that's pretty cool. I actually wondered that, but I love that strategy. Like you had some awesome guests on your podcast. Like I saw like Rick Ross. And he was smoking. He was like smoking a blunt on the podcast, right?
Yeah, on Zoom. Yep, it was epic.
I'm gonna be drinking a beer. I'm gonna be drinking a beer on this one. Like,
I love it. Hey, I think the authenticity of something like that, even just like you bringing that up, is so important when it comes to interviews. And like you see Joe Rogan smoke a joint with Elon Musk, and it's like the culture wants to see the authentic conversations that happen, right? Like I think the suit and tie interviews when everyone's trying to be so serious, sometimes like it doesn't come across as organic and authentic, So, I mean, with Rick Ross, he's smoking a blunt when we're doing an interview. And I'm like, do you, bro? Like, we're talking about business. This man owns hundreds of acres and like he's about his wealth creation, right? So it's he is someone unique and different. But I mean, having him on the podcast was epic. And that's a whole other story about how I got him on with, one of his favorite authors is Robert Greene, who I know you love as well.
48 Laws of Power, baby.
Yeah, dude. Yeah. And I remember seeing, I'm good friends with Robert. He's spoken at one of my events and we've stayed connected. I've had him on the show, and sometimes he'll just call me or I'll call him and he'll just give me advice on girl or like my relationship or whatever it may be. But when I reached out to Rick Ross, I was like, hey, Rick Ross, I just had Robert Greene on the podcast. I see you just dropped your book. It'd be such a pleasure to have you on the show for 15 minutes. He's like, oh man, Robert was on the show. Like, I'm in. He's like, let's go. So like for people like that, like, and one thing that I want to point out too is like all these different guests that I've booked, like they've all had different strategies, but it's came down to like, where can you find leverage, right? Like when I reach out to Rick Ross, my leverage point is I'm good friends with Robert Greene. But then on the back end, I've spent 4 years building a personal brand so that I can reach out to someone, they can see my track record, and it's an easier yes for them if they want to do it and if they're open to interviews. But, the podcast world and my experience with it has been incredible. And just like from the relationships, like one thing that I always tell people, like in conversations is my podcast is meant for 3 certain things. Number 1, building relationships. Number 2, deal flow. And number 3, like right now I'm a partner in this company called MediaKits.com, and we're raising our pre-series right now, and we're raising just over $1 million. We're about to close on that. And that's came from me tapping into my network with people that know, like, and trust me, that have rapport with me, that have, some type of respect for me, and they're interested in learning more about what I'm building. And this, with Media Kits, it's been a recent project that has really allowed me to take a step back. That's awesome. Do what I want to do with this network and this show. And I think it's something that I always tell people I'll do for the rest of my life, because it's just the biggest networking hack when meeting people. Yeah.
I love it. I have like 2 thoughts from that. Like I think like, so the rise of the young, right? That's the name of your podcast, and you're young, you're 20. Like, is that part of your intentional strategy? Cause I feel like someone like Rick Ross or anyone really, they're like, all right, I want to connect to a younger audience. His podcast name's Rise of the Young. He's young. Like, was that intentional to name it Rise of the Young, to like basically be the voice for like young people, whatever that means?
Yeah, I mean, when I started the show, and the reason I named it Rise of the Young was like when I was 16, just getting into this whole personal development entrepreneur space. And, I got into it because when I was 15, I was injured playing football. I was in a neck brace for 6 months. I was almost paralyzed. And you're okay now, right? So, yeah, I'm good. I'm about to go snowboarding tomorrow. Like we're rolling. But it was during this time period when I was 16, I was, starting to study someone like Tony Robbins and found out who Gary Vee was. And I'm going down this rabbit hole of just like immense knowledge. And I'm like, wow, my eyes are opening. Like I haven't heard any of this type of information ever. And I started to see like this youth movement. One of my good friends, Caleb Maddox, he was 14 at the time. He's wrote 7 books, sold millions of dollars from stage. And I was like, wow, like there's so many young people that I'm just connecting with on social media that are really like making strides and that are motivated and ambitious. So, Rise of the Young just came to me, a simple phrase. I self-published a book back in 2017, just called Rise of the Young. I stuck with the title, and I was like, hey, I'll just name my podcast Rise of the Young to be the voice of the youth. And from the perspective of the youth when I'm sitting down with these awesome people. But, never in a million years did I think I'd be able to say like, hey, I was the youngest person to interview Larry King, and we have a 67. That was cute.
That was cute with you and Larry King, because it was like an old man and a young guy. It was like, oh, everyone loves that. Everyone loves that.
And it's so cool because like the way my brain works is like I think 50 years in advance. Where I'm like, wow, like it's gonna be so awesome for a 19-year-old in 2050 to look at that interview with Larry King and I and say, that 19-year-old kid was interviewing 87-year-old Larry King, who was an absolute legend that my parents' parents used to talk about, that still has stood the test of time. And for me, like hitting those milestones and having those great people on the show when I'm like 19, 20, 21, 22, and over these next couple of years is very important to me, because it allows me to look back on like that period of my life from 17 to 21. And I think for me, it captures attention from someone young that, maybe they say, wow, like, maybe I can do it too. And it breaks down the barriers of age, right? Like, am I too young to do something, or am I too early to get started? So that's where it comes from.
That inspires people. Like, is most of your audience young people?
It's usually like, it's like 18 to 35, but more recently it's been like the 25 to like 35.
Well, you're aging a little bit, so your audience is aging a little bit, right?
Yeah,
That's kind of how it works.
For sure.
That's awesome. Yeah. Like when you interview someone in person, because this is episode like 87, 88 of my podcast. I've had some good people on. I know David Meltzer, Patrick Bet David. I've had one in person, and like we didn't really have the audio set up well, but like I just bought this big building for my business, and we're gonna have some space in there to like set up a studio. And like I definitely understand. Joe Rogan talks about it all the time. The value of like interviewing someone in person. There's just something special about it, and I get it. Like, do you like kind of hang out with like some of these people like before and after, like make a day out of it? I mean, I'm sure not with the mayor of Miami. You're probably in and out.
For sure.
Right? Yeah.
That's a phenomenal question too. And I think like these type of questions are what's very important for listeners, where like, for me, like some of the best conversations that I've had with people in person happen before and after the interview, right? Like when you turn off the recording, you're like, wow, that was incredible. And, like, for example, I just interviewed the co-founder of Twitch, Justin Kahn, last week. And, they sold to Amazon for $970 million.
Dude, yeah.
For sure. And like he recently minted his YouTube videos as NFTs, which I'm sure you've heard about, this whole crazy world.
I'll talk about that a little,
So before we got into the podcast, I was asking him about his NFTs and, knowing that I wanted to talk about it on the show as well. Like, we were just chatting beforehand. He was talking about why he did it, and we were just getting to know each other a little bit. And then we obviously did the podcast for 30 minutes. And then at the end of it, during the show, we're talking about startup investing and all this different types of stuff. I never like to take time during the interview to like pitch what I'm doing. Like I want to make it about the guest. But as soon as we ended the recording, I was like, hey, Justin, like, can I take 2-3 minutes of your time and screen share and show you what I'm building at Media Kids? He's like, go for it. He's like, the best time is now. It's best not that we set up a meeting. I'm a busy guy, but let's go for it. And, it showed me like, and I've done this a lot where take 5-10 minutes, screen share, show him what I'm building, tell him what I'm doing. And whether he just gives me advice or gives me a different perspective or wants to set up another meeting and potentially become an investor or whatever it may be, like, those are the conversations that people don't see that I do. Right. And I think for me, like, that's the most valuable part of this entire podcast ecosystem. If you have the right intention with it, right? Like I didn't interview Justin to pitch him, not at all, but I learned about his investment strategy. I learned about what he likes investing into. I learned about, he has a fund and all these different things. And I'm like, Justin, I'd love to show you this. And if he's open to it, and we just had a great conversation, he likes and trusts me now. He's down. So I think to your point, there's always great conversations that happen before and after the interviews. I mean, maybe a couple of times, I'd hang out with that person for a couple hours after if it's in person, but typically it's like even just the 5, 10, 15 minutes after, if we're hanging out on a Zoom or whatever it may be, like that's the gold. And that's what I always try to bring up when people ask me that, because
that's interesting.
Those are the unspoken conversations that people don't see. And that's
interesting. All right. So like I have not done a good enough job of that, because I mean, my business, like we sell clothing, we have an e-commerce company, United Monograms, is doing great. And I'm not necessarily like looking for investors or like have a product to pitch to like a successful person. And, I'd like wonder like the value I could keep of like holding a relationship. I think it's so interesting that you called Robert Greene and talked to him about girls and talked to him about stuff like that. Like you definitely must have like had some intention of doing that, but like that's not recorded, right? That's like genuine kind of like friendship.
Yeah,
right.
For sure.
Like that's pretty cool. Like, and like you went golfing with David Meltzer. I saw that. Like,
yeah. And funny enough, this is actually hilarious and a fun fact. So my girlfriend, Jacqueline Burnett, I've known her
I always see you talking her up on your story stuff.
No,
it's sweet. I love it.
No, I appreciate that, man. And she's incredible. But fun fact for like everyone in this business community. So Dave Meltzer is her cousin. And I've known Dave for 3-4 years before Jacqueline and I started dating. He's been a mentor to me. He's spoken to my events. So like the synergies and the overlap was quite ironic, to be honest. But it was like nowadays it's like family, like Dave just came on as an investor in Media Kids, and we just got him involved. So now he's a business partner, mentor. I guess you could consider him family in a sense. Right. So, and to your point though, it's like, those are the things that are crazy. The way the world works and how it all unraveled with just something as simple as that. Like Dave is an incredible speaker. I've listened to his podcast for years.
Yeah,
and,
I had him on. I had him on the podcast. He was awesome.
Yeah, no, he's incredible. But yeah, no, it's funny because like going golfing with him is just like now a casual Saturday, right? Because I'm dating Jacqueline, and that's her cousin, and it's just funny how the world works, Yeah,
it's kind of like a lifestyle thing too, because I don't really golf because I'm like kind of like a workaholic. I have like my business. We have machines and printers, and like that's like kind of my thing, like entrepreneurial. Like I never take a day off. Like a lot of people are like that, but like the value that you get from like hanging out with someone. I don't know. I've done it on the podcast a lot because it's been cool to talk to people, but I see how you do it pretty well. It's cool that you kind of take it out, and he's family, so it might be a little different, but the way you like kind of keep touch, like your NFT. So by the way, your NFT is badass. Like everyone's kind of just learning about NFTs. TillaVision, right?
Yeah.
So I never knew him before. Like you guys, I guess, hooked up. So what's the story there? Like he made it, right?
Yeah. No, I'll definitely. I'm excited to jump into this conversation. So for those who aren't familiar, and I'm sure everyone listening may have seen.
Everyone's like just learning about it. The whole world.
For sure. Yeah, totally. And yesterday Beeple's one post, not his one post, his one NFT sold for $69 million. Yeah. And like before someone jumps in, they're like, wow, like why would it sell for that? Like for context, he's been making a piece of art every single day for 5,000 days, which is 14 years. And his work yesterday paid off. Yeah. Phenomenal pieces of art, putting it out in the world for free. And I just wanted to preface that, but NFTs in a nutshell, non-fungible tokens, for people that may not know what that is, in the most basic form, the technology is transparently showing ownership on the blockchain. Like before you look at the art and all the hype, like it's proof of ownership on the blockchain. That is a fundamental principle of NFTs. What an NFT actually is, though, non-fungible token, here's an example. So a dollar bill, right? Or if me and you both own one Bitcoin, if we decided to trade Bitcoins, we both still have equal value. And that's a fungible asset, meaning if you exchange it, it's fungible. And I'm sure a lot of people may know this, but if you don't, non-fungible is something where if I have a LeBron James rookie card and you have the most up-to-date recent one that's not worth anything, those are non-fungible. I can't exchange that with you and receive the same value. So, everyone's looking at NFTs and they're like, why are they valuable? Why are they selling for so much? Why is everyone getting into it? It feels like this ICO boom of 2017. And my thought process, like, I definitely agree. There's a lot of hype. There's a lot of things that won't probably be of value in the long term. But here was my thought process. TillaVision, the artist that I partnered with, for context, he's been in the music business for 10 years. He's worked with DJ Khaled and Nas and Cardi B and like all these top rappers, Juice WRLD, all these guys. And he would do the stage visualizers. So when the artist is performing on stage, he's the one where is creating the crazy graphics and the visuals and all this type of stuff.
I didn't know that. So that's awesome.
He's a beast, So he's not just someone that's like looking to just hop in the NFT world to make a quick buck. Like he's a true artist. And I think that's the most important thing. And funny enough, I've done a bunch of live events in the past. Tilla and I got connected maybe 2 years ago, and he did a little animation for an event that I was doing in LA with, ironically, Robert Greene and Rob Dyrdek and Drama and all these great guys. So we just stayed connected. I never thought something would come from that, but this is like the importance of networking, right? Like I always supported him. I would showcase his art. Right. So he's dropped now 4 NFTs, including ours that came out 2 days ago as of this recording. So his first one was with a rapper named Chief Keef. And he did this NFT. He dropped it on Super Rare, which is one of the marketplaces, which is like harder to get onto. And it sold for $30,000. And when that happened, that was like late January or early February. So not too long ago. He hits me up that day and was like, yo, Casey, a long time no talk. I'm not sure if you're hip to the NFT world, but I just sold my first piece for 30K. I'm super excited about like this whole space and what's happening. Let's chat. And for context, he knew me as like this young hustler, entrepreneur, business guy, podcaster. Right. Yeah. So he was like, I'd love to just brainstorm with you because I respect you. And like, I'm looking to do more collabs. And then we just get talking. And when he told me this, let's just say it was late January, I have heard NFTs a couple of times. You hear it with Logan Paul, and I heard it when Beeple sold his piece for like $6 million bucks. Like I've heard it, but I've never went down the rabbit hole. But when he says this, we're talking. This was like middle of February 13th, exactly. I just remembered it because I was shopping for Valentine's Day, and he called me, and I was in the mall. So February 13th. It's a very a month ago from today.
Yeah, very recent.
So yeah, very recent. We start talking, we're brainstorming. I'm like, dude, I would love to learn about this. Like, give me 24 hours. I'm going to go down the rabbit hole and I'll call you back.
Yeah.
Go down the rabbit hole. I set up my MetaMask Ethereum wallet.
Right.
And, I've been dabbling in crypto since 2017, buying and selling, and just, I've been aware of it. So it wasn't like a brand new thing to me. But set up my MetaMask wallet. I go on OpenSea and Super Ray, and I'm just seeing what's happening. And I'm like, wow, this is incredible. Like, I love it. And I became obsessed with it. Call them back. I'm like, I'd love to experiment and do some type of collab together. I know you're working with, like he just did a piece with Sway Lee. They dropped that on Super Rare. That's auctioned off. It's like 12, 13
so
grand
he has
right
like
now.
The skill. He has the skill of making the actual like 3-dimensional art, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's his skill. So he's pumped about NFTs.
Artist.
Yeah.
So excited. Like he has so much potential and room to grow, but he's the artist, and he wanted to do more collabs with talent. So like, as I said, his first one was with Chief Keef. His second one he dropped was Sway Lee, the rapper. That sold for, it actually didn't sell yet. It's on auction for like 13 grand. They have it listed for like 25 Ethereum. So like 46. And that one was epic. Sway Lee's posting it, all this type of stuff. His third NFT he dropped was a, like memorial for, it was like Beeple and Andy Warhol like in a boxing ring. It was called like Token Soup, and it was like this chicken noodle soup can that opened up like to this boxing ring.
It's generational, and, 2 different like generations of artists. That's cool.
So this was like middle of February. He drops this piece that was individually, and that's when we're like brainstorming our piece. He ends up selling that. That's an individual piece for like 18 grand. Beeple ends up retweeting it on his page and was like, "OMG, this is crazy." So he has like so much momentum, and that brings me to our point of, as all this is happening in this world, like we agreed to, hey, let's do a piece. We start thinking, and our NFT, as I said, it wasn't necessarily, hey, let's go try to make this a money grab. We wanted to tell a story. So the whole piece is based on this meditation called the Mastermind Group. And it's this meditation. I can't remember the exact name. He put me onto it, but he had me meditate and think about the meditation went like this. It was like, imagine you're in a room and mentors in your life are walking in and you're sitting down with them. Like, what do they mean to you? How do they make you feel? And who comes into that room? And it just got me thinking like, wow, we want to make a piece that commemorates my last 3 years of interviewing hundreds of entrepreneurs and the microphone that,
that's
compels these stories.
That's
the centerpiece.
Right.
And we had so many different ideas, but the one that, is now live, and that we're currently on auction with, is a microphone going around a room, and you see these 3 characters, and you see myself sort of talking with them.
Yeah, and those characters like, you can't see their faces, right? Like
that's intentional.
Okay.
So
are they specific people, or are they just like symbols for people?
They're not. So here's the real answer. They're not specific people, but there's the 3 inspirations for that. So, for example, if you go around the table, you don't necessarily see their faces. So you don't see who they are. But the one guy, he has like the suspenders on, which is meant to embody like a Larry King. Okay. And then there's a lady who, one of my favorite conversations was with May Musk, Elon Musk's mother. Yeah. And so she's an embodiment of that. And then there's another guy who's an African-American guy who embodies Rick Ross. And for me, like, those are 3 impactful interviews to me, but are meant to represent, anyone who can fit that character in that mold. It's not represented to
That's
be
cool.
that.
I didn't know that. I didn't know that part of it.
Yeah. So
you got the little cyber truck. You got the little tiny cyber truck going around it.
Yeah.
And then like a Bitcoin.
The Bitcoin.
What's that book? What's the book that you had there? Like it said something. I forgot what it was.
Yeah, so it was like, it had 5 words. It was like who, what, where, when, why. And these were like questions about curiosity. And the book wasn't an actual book. It was more so a representation of things that are important to me. Like the book title on the side said, The Denial of Death. And that's a current book I'm reading right now. And it's phenomenal. It just talks about how people are so afraid of death and what that means to people, what death means to the world. And for me, I actually find motivation, and as weird as this may sound, like in death. Like sometimes I listen to a lot of motivational clips, I guess you could say, that talk about death and the amount of time you have in the world. That's why we have the clock in the background, the time that's ticking, and all these little things that are in the frame. We wanted it to be a very calm, like loop that just looks good, as like Tilla's an amazing artist. Yeah. So it looks good. It feels good. There's a story behind it. And that's what we came up with. We had 3 weeks, and I've been having so many conversations with different people, like hitting me up since I dropped a couple of the teasers last week. And I think this has been the most amazing piece. I mean, the most amazing part about this whole NFT drop. And right now, you know, we have our highest bids like 3.3 Ethereum, which is like $6,000.
That's like $6,000. Yeah.
Yeah. $6,000. And we,
it's still going. It's a bidding, right?
So how it works is we actually, just before this interview, we set a reserve price, which means once the bid hits this number, a 24-hour countdown auction begins. So for context, Tilla, he's never sold a piece for less than 11 Ethereum, which is like 20 grand, almost 18 grand. So right now our reserve price is 7.7 Ethereum, which is like 13 grand. So once we hit that price, whether it takes one day today, or that's the goal, or a week, once we hit that price, 24-hour countdown begins, and the highest bidder gets the piece. And we have some awesome people that are actually like coming in and bidding, and people that might not know them, but they're very big in the NFT crypto community. This guy on Twitter @SeedPhrase, I actually just interviewed him a couple of days ago, right before NFT dropped. He just sold a CryptoPunk, which is like one of the OG NFTs, for a little over $1 million, and it was 550 Ethereum. Last year, he bought it for $20,000. And he's been an OG guy in Bitcoin since 2013. And when I interviewed him, like he's not a personal brand where people don't really know his face or his name. They know like his NFTs, where he has like the CryptoPunk in his Avi on Twitter and like as his profile picture. So I had a conversation with him, and like he ended up setting the bid at like 2 Ethereum, and now he's like super interested in the piece. So we have like we have like 3 to 5 like real bidders that are, you know, went from
It's going to sell for a lot. It's going to sell for a lot.
Yeah. I mean, our goal is to,
you and TillaVision, like kind of like what, you like split that or something like that? Some deal?
I'm full transparency. It's 50-50 split. You know, he's the artist. And
you help like promote it, and you thought of it.
Yeah. It's like, it's my story, and our brains came together to create the art. But at the end of the day, like one thing that Tilla said to me, and like something I very much so respect about him, he's like, dude, like 50-50 split, you're putting in the effort, I'm putting in the effort, we're testing and experimenting. And I think that's the most important thing that anyone can take away, which is once I went down the rabbit hole of NFTs, like mid-February, I didn't just want to watch from the sidelines. I wanted to make an impactful piece. I wanted to get in the game. I didn't want to sit on the sidelines and just kind of see what's happening. I wanted to experiment, right? Like I think with any like new industry that is emerging, it's great to just test. Like even when I started my podcast, I read a book from Gary Vee, Crushing It, and the last chapter was about podcasting.
Yeah, I freaking love Gary Vee so much that I like hate him almost. He's a man. I don't hate him. I love him, but like he's so cool. This whole principle of like hearing about something and just executing on it as soon as possible has always been in my mind. So it's like I read the book, and then I started my podcast. I had like Apple headphones at the time. I recorded it on my Apple headphones. Like, all right, I was like, hey guys, welcome to Rise to Young's episode 1. We're going to be interviewing people. And I was like walking around in my bedroom in Virginia, but I was like obsessed with like getting started. Right. And it wasn't necessarily the best setup or the most quality piece of content ever, but I just got started. And I think the same thing goes for this NFT world, but in a sense, like quality is important, right? Like I didn't want to just put up something and be like, oh, it's an NFT. Like I wanted a story. I wanted to collaborate with an artist. I wanted to drop it on a platform that's hard to get accepted on Super Rare. And I wanted to bring in some epic buyers and people that really believed in it and see value in the piece. So that's what we did. And like, it's been like a 30-day sprint to get it out there, but I'm super impressed by where we're at, you know, sitting at $6,000. Like I'm not an artist myself. Like that, you know, the typical NFT, like not many people get over 1 Ethereum. Like you see all these headlines and Stevie Aoki sold for 3.5 million and Beeple sold for 69 million. I bought a Teddy Roosevelt with like a halo and like a drippy face. Because I was doing the same thing as you, learning about it, testing it. I bought it for like $200, and just because I was testing it out. Yeah,
exactly. And I think that's where a lot of people are, right? Like I set up my wallet, I put $500 in it or whatever. I you know, I'm trying to buy this little piece or whatever it may be. But, you know, for us to already be at 3.3 Ethereum in like 2 days, like I'm excited about it. Not only just from a financial perspective of where we can see it going, but just the momentum that I was able to go from complete knowing nothing about the space 30 days ago to diving in with an epic artist, getting something posted, having something really amazing created, and then now having real people that are in the space bidding on it. And for me, one thing that I've noticed, and I know I'm kind of going on a tangent here. I love it. Like all of these awesome people that are in my life and that I've interviewed that are in my network have been calling me like, yo, like you're the first person that I've seen like actually drop something that's like
now
one degree of separation away. Yeah. And they're like, yo, I love the way I approached it. I love TillaVision. His art is epic. And like, he's an epic, like just creator. And they were like, let's see how we can like do something together. And I think that just spark of like being ahead of the curve and putting out something of value and letting everyone like turn their heads and like, wow, like Casey did this, he executed on it. And now he's like one of the first people I know to mint an NFT on a super rare or something.
Yeah. The cool thing about the NFT, it's like, it can go up in value, right? Like if someone buys it for 13 grand, and it had like an old rookie card, LeBron James rookie card, whatever, Michael Jordan rookie card. Like they're valuable because they're older and they're cooler and they're like original. So say in 20 years, like people look at this piece as like a memory of when NFTs were just starting and it sells for like 500 grand. On the blockchain, you still get like a piece of that, right?
Yeah. So this is like the typical standard. You get 10% of the resale value for life.
That's crazy.
So if we sell
and if it sells like 3 times, do you get 10% each time?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Dude, that's so cool.
So, and that's the real power. When I saw that and I was like, I have a lot of friends that are artists and like just creators in general. But like specifically artists, like whether that's painters or photographers or whatever it is, like one of my buddies, Justin, he helped really get into the NFT game as well. He's spent the last 3 years traveling all over the world, taking pictures of twins. And his whole story was like, he had a twin that died at birth and it's like super important to him. And he traveled all over the world, spending his own time, money, and resources, taking 100 pictures of twins, like I said, all over the world. He built this collage of 100 like real framed pictures and was looking to sell it for the longest time and didn't have success. He decided, this is like a month ago, to mint each picture as an NFT on OpenSea. Within 3 days, he sold out for 1 Ethereum each. He made over 150 grand in literally like 3 to 5 days. But he had a great promotional strategy. He was in these NFT communities and he bridged the gap, like one of the first people to bridge the gap between photographers and NFTs. And he made a statement, and not only did it benefit him financially, but he's now known in this space and people are reselling his work and it's already turning into this movement.
Yeah. No one's probably more excited than artists about this because you couldn't sell that piece. I mean, it's hard to sell art. You have to, I don't know, shipping and like finding one person and like, where do you list it? Like, it's weird kind of.
Yeah. And then even too, like for musicians and album releases and ticketing, like people, I was talking to this guy, same guy, the seed phrase guy that has a bid on my piece. He was like, think about going to events. If you buy a ticket online, you receive it as an NFT, which is a transaction that occurred publicly on the blockchain, where in 5 years you could say like, like I went to Coachella in 2022 and here's my ticket. You can see I bought the ticket on, it's on the blockchain. It's all transparent. So like just from a digital ownership or like representation of whatever it may be, there's so many different use cases. Like right now, as we've said, like the art hype is where the money is and where people are focusing on their attention. But this whole metaverse and digital universe where you can hang your art in your virtual house and buy virtual real estate, like it sounds insane, but it's moving in that direction. And like, I am now like a very solid believer in like all this technology, even though I'm not like the most expert, but it's crazy.
I think the coolest thing is like, I've been talking about Bitcoin 2017. I bought some too. Like I've done really well with Bitcoin. I own 2, but whenever I had someone on my podcast, this guy, John Vallis, to talk about Bitcoin, who's very knowledgeable about it. And one of the questions I asked him was about blockchain, because that's what everyone talks about. And I was like, well, okay, blockchain, what's the deal with that? He's like, I don't know really. Like, but now this is an example of how like NFTs and Bitcoin are not the same thing, but the blockchain technology is the piece that is, I've been waiting to see what else it can do because people have been talking about that. They're like, the blockchain is the real technology. And now this is the first like real world example. And now you mentioned tickets and I'm trying to like think where else could it go? I mean,
people have had conversations about like real estate, like deed transfers. When you buy a piece of real estate, you get it, you get a representation of that as an NFT, so you can see when it transfers hands, whether that's the deed or whatever it may be. Like there's so many different use cases, and
so the value there wouldn't be like it's so cool. It's just like actually more practical to transfer a deed through the blockchain.
And then like people are saying like, what about passports and how can the government tap into this? And the government's so like outdated and it's so hard to go through all that type of stuff. But just in the future, like how can it really be used from a world perspective to show digital ownership on the blockchain for anything, right? So it's exciting and it's cool.
It's exciting. It's really exciting. We're lucky to like live in this time where this is like emerging.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
we're blessed. We're blessed. I'm young too. I'm 30, so I'm young too.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Rise of the young. Yeah, it's so cool that like, I love it. We live in such a good time. I mean, if we didn't have, imagine trying to start a podcast when you were in your room with your headphones, your Apple headphones. Like, you would have had to get on a radio station, right, to be allowed to talk. Like, no one would allow me to just start talking out of nowhere, right?
Yeah.
And like a newspaper, TV, radio. That was it up until like, I don't know, 15 to 25 years ago, 20, whatever. So we're all so lucky, and it's so cool.
For sure.
We live in a great time. Like, so I like your interview with the Sway House guys, right? Like Josh Richards and so you went to like the Sway House?
Yeah, I mean, I've been good friends with Michael Greene, like the co-founder of Sway and Talent X. They actually just had an acquisition like 3 days ago to Wreck-It Global, which is like this big gaming company. But I've known Michael for probably 3-4 years. Awesome friend of mine. Like, he's helped me get my interview with Tillman Fertitta, who's the billionaire owner of the Houston Rockets. He invited me to the dinner with Tillman Fertitta where I met Larry King's son. Then I ended up interviewing Larry King. So like, he's always
you're so good at real world networking. Like, I got to get out there and go to dinner with like some of these people. Like, I'm always like,
dude,
like,
that whole story is crazy. It was like, I interviewed Tillman Fertitta on Zoom, and he was promoting his book called Shut Up and Listen. And this was back 2019, like October 2019. After the interview, like 2 weeks later, I'm living in Arizona at the time. Michael hits me up and he was helping him with book promos. He's like, "Hey, do you want to come out to a dinner with Tillman Fertitta?" They're having like 30 people there at the Mastro's Beverly Hills to, for everyone that helped promote his book. I was like, absolutely. My good friend and best friend and business partner, Kieran O'Brien, and I go out there. And he owns Mastro's. So it's like the Tillman Fertitta service. There's like 30 people there, great people. Everyone is going around the room introducing themselves. And Tillman, one of my best friend Kieran that's there with me, he's sitting at the other end of the table. He sits next to this guy named Chance. And going around the room, Tillman's like, "Chance, like, stand up. I just want to say thank you so much. It was a pleasure being on your father's show today." And Chance King. And I just want to say it's such a pleasure always collaborating with your father. Thank you so much. And then Kieran's like running over to me like, "Dude, this is Larry King's son. Like, you should definitely like talk to him and meet him." And ironically, I was having an event the weekend after that. So, I ended up just walking up to Chance, getting to know him a little bit. We exchanged contact. I'm telling him that I'm having an event next week with Rob Dyrdek and all these cool people. And, we just get connected. He comes out to my event the next weekend, show him a good time. And that was like October 2019. And I ended up interviewing Larry King December 2019. And this is the craziest part. In between the time of meeting Chance and like even asking to see if his father would love to come on my show, like, I don't typically like to ask for those type of things. But ironically, this before I lived in LA, I was just visiting, was at the Century City Mall, walking around, and guess who I run into randomly? Larry King.
Are you serious?
He's like,
and then you can say, I know your son and stuff like that.
Bingo.
Boom.
So, and I like walking people through the story because some people might have seen that and let him, just pass and not say anything. He's in his wheelchair, he's with 2 other people. And I just walk up to him, this is before COVID, end of 2019, walk up to him and Larry, like, my name's Casey Adams. I met your son, Chance King, like 2 weeks ago at a Tillman Fertitta dinner. Just wanted to introduce myself and say hello. And he's, "Oh, that's amazing. Like, Chance is amazing. I'm so glad that you guys connected." We take a quick selfie. I sent it to Chance. I'm like, "Yo, guess what I just ran into?" And it's just hilarious. But
that's awesome.
During the end of October, early November, I'm talking to Chance. I'm like, Chance, such a pleasure getting to know you the last couple of months. What are the odds that you think your father would come on my podcast? It'd be such an honor to have him on the show and to talk about his legacy and just who he is as a person. And, Chance was looking into who I am and seeing that I had a podcast for years. Like, it wasn't my first episode where I was like, "Hey, let me interview your dad."
You have credibility, and you had a selfie with him, and you met him from before. So you weren't looking like some guy just coming in being like, "Do my podcast." Yeah.
So like, we ended up talking. He ended up running it by him. He's like, he's just coming off a stroke. He's not doing the best health wise. He's 86 at the time. Ends up saying like, can't do it right now. He's not doing that well. Wasn't doing that many interviews. So like towards Thanksgiving 2019, like I always like to send people like selfie videos, say I'm grateful for you, for the people that I've met that year or whatever.
So good.
I end up sending one a Chance, hitting them up again, a couple of weeks later, like, "Hey, like, I'd love to just circle back whenever you believe it'd be great timing for him to come on the show. Let me know. Like, this is something that I'd love to make happen." And he goes, I remember I was taking off from Pittsburgh, heading back to Arizona from visiting my family in Virginia. And he was like, hey, like, he's down to do it. Let me know when you're going to be back in LA in the next 2-3 weeks and we can set it up. I'm like, December 10th, I'll be there. And boom, got it locked in. And that was the day I interviewed him, December 10th, 2019. And like that whole moment and build up to that, like looking back, like you would have no idea how that would unravel, but just being able to look back and tell that story is so important to me, not only because he's not with us anymore, rest in peace to him.
R.I.P.
For sure. And like, but just like the story and the journey about the timing. This is the craziest thing to me. I interviewed him in December 2019, and like February, March 2020 was when COVID started happening, and people aren't going out as much, and him being 87 years old
in person, and he doesn't do a lot of interviews. He's usually the interviewer.
Yeah. So, and we did it at his studio in like the legendary Larry King room. So based on what I know, I was the last person to interview him in person at his studio, like publicly on air that you can see anywhere. And that isn't like necessarily like the most important thing to me, but it's just such a moment. And
you'll always have that. He's the most legendary interviewer, probably of all time, possibly. And
100%.
You did his last interview with him in person. I mean, dude, keep talking about that. Keep putting it in your NFT. I mean, that's powerful. And like, dude, it has a cool story with how you connected it. Shows your networking skills. Like that's
for sure. So I mean, it's a story, but it's also knowing when to ask, knowing what makes sense, and most importantly, like being genuinely curious about who he is. Right. Like I was so excited to speak with him, and one of my friends asked me the other day. He was like, out of everyone you've ever interviewed, like what's the biggest lesson that you've taken away to this day? And I always bring up Larry King, and I say, like, he has this quote. It's I've never learned anything while I was talking. And he talks about curiosity and like those two simple philosophies of knowing when to listen and learning through that process and just staying curious about life. Like, he's 87 years old, still doing interviews, still having shows, still talking to people.
He's the man. He's been like the old guy joke for like 20 years, and he embraces it. He's so cool.
Yeah. So like that whole ideology of embracing your curiosity and just loving what you do, like those are things that I will never forget, and something that I can, when he did unfortunately pass, like I was rewatching that interview with him and just like thinking to myself, like, wow, like it's so cool that I can look back on this moment. And I think that's also such a great thing about podcasting and just interviewing and documenting your journey in general is like
my favorite. That might be my favorite part. Yeah.
Cause like, I'm only 20 years old right now. Right. I've only been doing this for 3 years, but like out of all the people I've interviewed, like in 10, 20, 30 years, like those interviews are going to get, I guess you could say like OG or
you can mint them. You can mint them as an NFT.
Yeah, for sure. So it's like, I'm just excited about this whole space moving forward. And like, I'm glad that I decided to go down this path of doing interviews, because it might not be necessarily something that, like for me, I always think about my interview and my podcast like this. It's, I do everything myself. I have a team that obviously edits it and uploads it for me and helps me with that whole editing process. But for me, like if I don't feel like doing 3 interviews next week, I don't. But if I want to do 12 because there's a hot topic and NFTs are happening and I want to interview all these great people, I can. And like eventually I plan to like do a deal with Spotify or do an exclusive deal with someone, or just do like a whole back end private community and private podcast type of thing. But there's just so much opportunity in this space. And the most important thing for me is just like the conversation and what can happen from that. Like my whole goal is by the time I'm 25, like have a venture capital fund and invest in early age startups, because I have so much great deal flow already of people running deals by me and people that have opportunities that I can help fundraise or whatever it may be. So
I wanted to ask you about that, but real quick before that, like when you interview somebody, right, like a Larry King or anyone, Rick Ross, how do you kind of go into it? Like, how do you prep? Do you watch a lot of their old videos, or do you try not to? What's your approach there?
That's a great question. Everyone's sort of different. So like for someone like Larry King, I like watched every interview I could find. I at least tried to, because that was such a special moment.
Do you try to ask questions that he's never been asked before?
I would say yes, for sure. But I write down 0 questions on every single interview I do. So I don't have any intention with what I want to get from them. It's, I obviously do my research and I know like what their story is in a sense, but I just let the conversation flow. Something like what we're doing now, like you could go down so many different rabbit holes, and I may have a couple things that I'm curious about that if they pop in my head, like I'm going to make sure I bring up. But for someone like Larry King, it was like about broadcasting. It was about his legacy. It was about family. It was about these things that I believe were important to him and that I wanted to capture in that moment. So I always try to think about that, like what is different, what kind of different conversation can I have with this type of person, but B, just let my curiosity flow. Right. Like I think too, I remember like the first 30 interviews I did, I was trying to write down all these questions and over prepare. And like, it turned into like
I've had that problem before, like over preparing and then like not listening, going to the next question.
Yeah. And it turns into this mental, like full-time job of preparing and getting ready, where for me, sometimes like I'll hop on an interview with someone, I know who they are, and the interview is at 12 and like, I won't even think about it until 11:59. And I'm like, cool, jump into it. Go. And like I built up the repetition and skill set to now be able to do that. But like, you know, sometimes in the past, like when it got to an hour before, like I started thinking and overthinking and starting to try to over prepare. And I just think for the way I approach podcasting and interviews, I like it to be a benefit to my day, not something that over consumes my mental space that I'm thinking about all day. Like, oh, I have an interview at 1. I got to get prepared and I gotta reach, like dive deeper.
I've done that before. I've had to like take up my whole night before, and they don't even turn out to be some of the best podcasts because it's too prepped. Like I like when it's just kind of flowing, like we're doing now.
For sure, no, 100%. So I think that's like my approach is like keep it chill, keep it authentic, and like everyone has to find their strategy. You know, there's times and places for very direct, question oriented interviews. Yeah, like when they're shorter, maybe.
Yeah, I was going to ask you like podcasting in general. I know kind of everyone has their own strategy. Like some podcasts are very education based, like education driven. Like I want to efficiently listen to like 10 minutes and learn about Facebook ads, right? And then some like Joe Rogan, like conversation. Do you ever try to like keep it to value or just keep with the flow like we're talking about? I mean, like people like listening to, I guess, conversations kind of, right? It's basically a difference between kind of value and entertainment, right?
For sure. I mean, I always think like I lead with value. I try to make every conversation about entrepreneurship, their story, like what they're good at, how they've built their company. Like, you know, I've interviewed a lot of CEOs. I just had the former CEO of Chipotle that built it from 8 restaurants to a $35 billion company. And like, these are conversations that I ask about team building and strategy and like the higher level business philosophies that they live by, or with the founder of Twitch. But, you know, at the same time, I love asking the founder of Twitch, like why he minted his YouTube videos as NFTs. And like, that's a random thing that he's doing now that he's excited about. And it's like, it's cool to talk about this thing because at the end of the day, like every interview can be so different depending on you know, the questions you ask, right? Like you can pick and choose what you want to get from somebody. And sometimes I'll think back in interviews and like, I wish I asked something else, or I wish I said this or whatever it is, but it's like, you can't dwell on that. But to your point, I think it's just different for everyone. And for me, I always think I lead with value. I have the business conversation, like with Rick Ross. We're not just talking about music and whatever. Like we're talking about his businesses and his real estate and his investments and his wealth creation mindset and all that type of stuff, which I personally am interested in. Like I like to learn. I was going to say,
do you like personal questions or like focus on the audience?
For sure. I think it's important for me to ask sometimes like some selfish questions and like things that I want to learn.
I'm
like,
kind of doing that now because I'm curious about the podcasting game. Like,
like that. And I think too, like sometimes like I used to make it about like, oh, the audience when like you need to just ask questions that you like and you enjoy. And
be aware that they're there, but like, you're right.
Yeah. So, but for me though, I just try to like, sometimes I like when I interviewed the founder of Twitch, I threw up a story and I was like, hey, like what should I ask him? And sometimes I actually take those and like, those are good questions. Or sometimes I like to look about, oh, what do people want to listen to? But at the end of the day, I just sort of like going with the flow, doing my thing. And like to my core, my podcast, like it's awesome. It's gained momentum. I have all these people on, but it's such a networking hack. And now it's become a part of my life as like this secondary thing where if I meet someone and I think they're interesting and boom, just, hey, let's do a podcast. Like,
I think that's like, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think that's like your best skill is, yes, you're good at networking, but like getting cool people. Like the guy that you were talking about, he said he's not famous. I even forget his name, Seafreeze or whatever.
Seafreeze,
yeah. Like I saw him a little bit on Twitter, but he's known for his NFT work. He's not known as a personal guy. So that is so cool for people to actually hear you talk to him. Like I think you're good at like picking out cool people that like haven't come on yet. And they'll probably say yes because they they haven't done a lot of podcasts before. They're not known for
he told me that
a personality of their own, but their story, someone has to tell their story. So it's cool.
Yeah, for sure. He said, I took his podcast virginity. It was the first time he ever did a podcast. So, he was excited to do it. And like, he's getting interviewed by Forbes and the Atlantic and all these different platforms because he's like this NFT mogul, but like to come up on a podcast, like he's down for it. He's open to it. And I think it's becoming this more mainstream thing where like, hey, like jump on my podcast. If someone has an audience, they have a listenership and you want to tell your story, like a podcast is such a great forum for like telling your story, talking about different topics that you enjoy. And it's going to become the point where, you know, everyone has an Instagram page and it's like, oh, what's your Instagram?
Yeah.
One day in my like 10-year view, it's like, if everyone has a podcast, like, yes, there's only room for a certain amount of like great shows, but everyone has their micro communities, right? Everyone has friends that they talk to or people that are acquainted to them, where if you have a conversation and you put it out as a podcast, it's like an audio format, it's long form, and it's a great way to just capitalize on conversations, I like to say. So it's an exciting space. And, you know, I think the podcast business as a whole too, like I have this tech startup that I'm personally working on. It's called PodSwipe. It's a podcast connection company. And, you know, we're not launched yet. It's still very early. And I try not to like dilute my time and energy. Like right now with maybe MediaKids.com, we're fundraising and we're closing that and we're launching our MVP. But I have this whole business philosophy of like, you know, figure out a micro niche that you can personally capitalize on and help. And the podcast business, when it comes to M&A activity and like I said, like the acquisitions that are happening, it's crazy with Spotify and like this company Podchaser just made a bunch of acquisitions. You see Acast and all these real, I would say, colossal podcast businesses. Like it's a whole different animal than like the front end podcast industry. And like both sides of the table are fascinating to me. I've had some conversations with some of the biggest networks and just, it's such a cool space because it's so new. It's like the wild, wild west and there's so much opportunity.
Yeah. And everyone listens to podcasts now. Like that didn't used to be the case and they have a lot to choose from, but you stand out. Like there's absolutely people out there listening. I was talking about the Sway House a little bit just cause I think it's like, I just think it's cool. Like I think it's so cool. Like even I just got married recently. I'm getting used to using the word wife, but I don't think it sounds cool. I think like girlfriend sounds cooler, but I'm recently married. But she's
congratulations. That's exciting, man.
Thanks. Yeah. But she's even like into like the guys in the Sway House. I'm like, oh, you're looking at those like hot dudes on TikTok or whatever. But like Bryce and like when you like kind of went there, I just think it's such a cool thing to get a bunch of people together in a house and like live there and like make content. Like that's so cool.
Yeah. I mean,
hung around it a little bit, right? Yeah,
for sure. And like, I think the way they're doing it too, like the content house perspective is great for young creators. And like the Sway House, like they have a great team and management behind it. A lot of the houses that people see or that are popping up, they don't have the right business team behind it. Like Sway LA and Talent X as a company, like, and Michael and the team that they've built, based on what I know, is like phenomenal and they get it done. But yeah, I mean, they're great people. Like I've had Bryce and Josh on the show twice now. More recently, Josh talking about Andy Energy and his podcast that he did with Barstool Sports and everything that he's a part of. And he's just a sharp guy, but it's like they wouldn't be who they are today without the people around them. And like that's the most important thing.
Like they are kind of like the talent. They're kind of like the Kardashians a little bit. Like people are interested in like, oh, Bryce and Addison like broke up. Like, ooh, it's kind of like that's like what people brings in the eyeballs a little bit is like the drama.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's like they're capitalizing on it right now, but they're doing it in the right way where they're building businesses behind it. They have so much brand power where they're getting into angel investing right now and they have their energy drink and they have
I was listening to your podcast with Josh and I was actually pretty impressed with he said
they're smart guys.
He told a story about like punching Michael and the party and everything, but then like he's like, now I'm scheduling my time and I'm doing like podcasting, YouTubing days, like days where I look at investments. I'm like, okay, that's smart. Like you're actually smart to be capitalizing on this.
No, they crush it, and I think anyone can learn something from them. Even though Josh is my age, like he's crushing it, 30 million followers or whatever it may be, and like they have the world at their hands right now. And it's like the cool thing that I love thinking about them is like they just need to continue surrounding themselves with great people, and I know they will. But they're great guys, and on social media you can sometimes get this front end persona like, oh, like how are they behind the scenes? But like sitting down with them and talking to them and like getting to know them, it's been epic, and they're cool guys.
Yeah, we should start like an entrepreneur house or something like that. Like,
That'd be epic. I'm sure. I mean, there's definitely a couple of those out there for sure.
I wonder what they do in there. I mean, making content's cool, but like everyone would just probably be like on their computers, like thinking of ideas and stuff like that. But do you listen to, like, what podcast do you listen to?
I listen to this one called Group Chat by three people that I know: Drama from Young and Reckless, D Murphy, and Anand Murphy. And it's like a business, culture, streetwear type of chat. They kind of frame it as like business and current events and like just what's going on in the world. It's like a news source, but it's funny, it's entertaining. They bring on cool guests, and like, Drama. They're all good friends of mine, and we've done events in the past together. But I love that one.
Do you listen to a lot? Like Gary Vee always talks about, I don't consume any content. I don't read any books. I never listen to podcasts. I'm like, oh, well, I do. Like if I'm in the car, like what else am I going to do?
Yeah. I like podcasts a lot. I mean, Andy Purcell's is epic. Group Chat, Robin Hood Snacks. Trying to think.
And what do you like to, when you're listening to a podcast? Like, I feel like I heard you say you like the book Think and Grow Rich. Like that book changed my life. Most epic book. Like since I've been 19, I kind of got on the kick that you were when you were 16. Like I've been obsessed with knowledge. So for like 4 or 5 years, all I did was listen to like success principles, mindset. Like I kind of ingrained that stuff in me. So like now I kind of like to listen to a little more like current events or takes on it or like interesting conversation. Like when you're listening to them, what are you looking for?
Yeah, I think for me, it's a little bit of like the education and entertainment, right? Like I love hearing about like what's going on in the world, different like companies that are raising capital and who they're raising it from. Like I love this podcast called the All In Podcast by a couple of these big VCs in Silicon Valley. And it's just funny, it's entertaining. They're all friends, but they're also talking about like different investments they're making and why and industries and all this type of stuff. So that's good. But yeah, I mean, I think for me, there's a little bit of entertainment, and I'm always looking to get something from the podcast, like to learn something. Like I don't just listen to stories just to listen to them. Like I like reading books, like biographies and like real stories.
I love biographies. I love biographies.
Yeah. I just read the Bob Iger book, CEO of Disney.
Yeah, I haven't read that.
That was just one of the most incredible books I've read recently. And like he has this story in there with Steve Jobs when Disney was acquiring Pixar, and like that's the one thing I read and that I took away from the book. And it's epic. I'm not going to spoil the book, but I love biography. Like right now I'm reading this book. I actually started on the plane yesterday. It's about Instagram, and it's like the whole foundational story of Instagram and how it came to be. And like first chapter, I'm like dialed in. And right now, like I like to read books that I can apply to today. Like right now we're raising capital. We're about to launch our MVP. And this book is, the first 2 chapters are about then building the product and having to switch gears and how he led to find his partner and how they went to raise capital and like all these different things to now making it this, getting acquired by Facebook, and now it's the Instagram that we all know today. But I like to read books that I can.
Dude, I read this biography about Milton Hershey. And it's like might be like my favorite book ever. It's the guy who started like the Hershey Candy Factory. He like went out to this random town outside of Pennsylvania, and he just like bought all the land and like built the whole Hershey factory. Then he like went down to Cuba and created his own sugar plant. Wow. And maybe like subconsciously it inspired me, because like I have a physical business. I just bought like a big building, and like it was one of my favorite books. And I was like, wow, biographies are such a great way to like learn through people. Yeah. And I don't know. I just love that book.
What's that book called? Do you know?
Milton Hershey biography, Google it or something. I forget the name. I think it might have been called like Chocolate Man or something like that. Okay. But it's really cool to see like someone with an entrepreneurial mindset in olden times, because it's like, it's like basically like what we would be, or like what entrepreneurs, they had different situations. Obviously they didn't have a ways to get out. Imagine having to get a message out, but you had to go talk to a newspaper journalist or something like that, or like put up a billboard or like a sign. It's so hard to get a message out back then. Even like my mom would have parties and like put a flyer up around town to like, get people to come to the party. Like that's so old school, but it's cool to see like that was their intention. Like if they would have had Instagram or whatever, they would have been all over.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the times have changed today. And I think the people that understand that, like I've been having so many conversations with NFTs, right? And people are denying it or saying, what's the value, or why would you think that way? It's the same people that might have thought the internet was a fad and that social media wasn't the way to advertise, and your business shouldn't be on social media. It's for taking pictures, right? So it's like, I think there's always the early adopters, and then you
Right.
want to be on the early adopter
Of
curve, not
course. Yeah.
the late adopters at the end of
Right.
the
And
day, right?
that
And
seems
even
like so obvious to me because I've adapted that same mindset. Like if something's new, I automatically am like, oh, this is awesome. That's my mindset just because I want
yeah,
to make myself like it. So if I have to figure out how to, get through it on the app or whatever,
yeah,
then I'll just get through it.
totally.
I feel like everyone's like a little smarter now, even over the past like 8 months. Like, do you agree? Like, do you think that just the average person is more smart than they were like 5, 10 years ago?
It's hard to say. I mean, I look at it like you are the association of the people that you spend the most
Maybe
time
that's
with, right?
why
So it's
I
like, yeah,
maybe
like
that's why I think that because I've like been around having podcasts with smart people and stuff
yeah,
like that.
in that philosophy, 100%, because like I live on this whole ideology of like the law of 33%. Spend time with 33% of the time with people that are above your level, 33% of your time with people that are on your level and that you can build with and grow with, and then 33% of your time with people that you can help inspire, right? So like for me, I look at it with like when I do my interviews, that's my higher level 33% that I'm learning from. Then it's like when I'm doing my business stuff, working with my co-founders and like we're actually building a product, those are my 33% that moves the needle. Then it's like for me when I do when I'm releasing the podcast and putting it out in the world, that's the 33% of the time where I'm like educating or like telling stories, and I can be that voice and platform for whoever listens. So, I mean, I think to your question of like, are people more educated? I think the people that want to be educated 100%, like, I come from a small town in Virginia where not many people ever travel to the West Coast. And like, I didn't fly on a plane until I booked the ticket myself when I was 16. And like this whole mindset of working a 9 to 5 and retiring when you're 60 is like the ideology. So it's like, when I think back to my hometown, I'm like, oh my gosh, like I'm not sure if anyone has grown in the last 5 years mentally or career wise or whatever it may be, because like they're not obsessed with it, right? Like be obsessed with what you do.
And they're not the ones on my they're not the ones on my Twitter feed that I'm like, wow, everyone's like having a great conversation. Like they're not on there.
It's like, you get to cultivate your own, like social media is so feedback driven where like depending on who you follow, what you like, what you do, like you get fed what you like, right? So if you're
I unfollow people a lot,
that educates you,
I care about my feed. Like I want my feed to be like enjoyable to go to. Do you approach social media that way? Like some big people, they'll have like 3 million followers and they're following like 6 people, and I'm like, okay, that person doesn't like go to Instagram to see stuff. How do you?
Yeah, I mean, I follow like 2,300 people, which is a lot. I probably don't know personally half of them or more, but it's happened to the point where like, if I run into someone, right, and I get to know them and they're cool and like we hit it off, like I'll follow them, not necessarily because I want to consume all of their content, but you can build your social web, right? Where if I follow someone and I say, oh, we have 12 mutual friends, you can see like who they are and you can instantly get a little perspective on who they might be and who they're connected with, right? Like when I DM someone to come on my podcast and say, oh, we have 4 mutual friends. Oh, like I follow this person, they follow me. We've talked in the past. Maybe I can reference him when I DM him to see if there's like there's a touch point there. Right. So for me, following people really just means like, okay, and I've met them or I know them or I think they're cool and I like what they're doing. I've thought about it so many times, like, oh, do I just like unfollow everyone and follow no people? Do I just follow my company? Right. Do I just follow like whatever? But I mean, I think that's just a stigma where people want to seem like, oh, I only follow 4 people or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
But it's also like,
it's just for the look, I guess.
But on the same token, like sometimes I use social media and I'm sure I could consider myself wasting time and I'm on there and I'm like, okay, like if I did unfollow everyone, I'm sure I wouldn't look on there as much because I wouldn't be looking at anything, right? So on the same token, it's really about just monitoring why you're on social. Like every time I go on social, I try to make an interaction that is not consuming, but producing, whether that's producing a DM or commenting on a post or responding to DMs. Like I spend a lot of times in my DMs, like responding to people and trying to talk to people, like whether that's videos or voice messages or just sending actual messages. Because like, I don't like to go on social and just consume, right? Like you always have to think what you're consuming is what someone else is producing. And they're the ones that are actually utilizing social, not just like sitting there mindlessly scrolling, right?
So do you get like a little FOMO, or like not FOMO, but like a little bit of, I need to be doing stuff. Everyone else is doing stuff. Like, I think it's a good feeling because it's like, that's what drive is. The feeling of like, I got to do something. I got to go. I got to rock.
Yeah. I mean, I told my brother this yesterday. Like, he just got his real estate license like a couple months back, and he's sold like 4 or 5 houses. He's off to a good start, and he feels like, oh, I need to be getting ahead. And like I told him, I'm like, dude, I feel like I haven't done anything yet. I feel every single day I wake up like I have a blank slate and I'm literally just getting started. And like the next thing is like, you have to keep finding yourself in that energy, right? Like, yes, you have a track record. Yes, I have intentions with building a personal brand and now building all these different companies that I'm a part of. But every single day I wake up like, what's next? Like you can't get, what's the right word? Like stuck up on your past and act as if like, oh, like, let me just coast now and let the world take care of it. Right. Like I'm still the one sending all my DMs and actively responding to people and commenting on posts. And yes, I could outsource and had someone do that for me, but I just like that personal touch and connection. And like, even till this day, like when I first got on social, I was so scrappy with it. And I was sending all these DMs a day and reaching out to people. And like, that's what motivates me, right? Like every single day trying to like, when I get a DM back from someone, even though I know I have some leverage now and it's easier, like I still get excited when I get a response back, right? Like that dopamine rush of like, okay, cool. I sent them the DM. I put it out there. They got back to me. We got the podcast done. Like epic. Like that same energy is the same way I felt when I was 17, like interviewing my first guest. So I think that staying in like your roots is important.
Yeah. You should follow me on Insta, by the way.
Do I not?
I don't know.
Dude.
Maybe. No, Sean Lowery 20, actually, baby.
Dude, and I'm so glad you said that because like literally, like sometimes people will be like, yo, like, we talk, we're friends, but like, not why don't you follow me? But like, yo, why don't you follow me? And it's like, dude,
I thought I did or something. Yeah.
I just followed you, by the way. But like, I love when people ask that because it's not even like a, oh, why don't you follow me? But like, yo, follow me. Like, for me, like that follows 2,500 people. Then I love just like following is like a sense of like, we know each other in a sense. Like I'm all about it. So I'm glad you asked.
Yeah, dude. I thought you might do it right if I asked it.
For sure. 100%. And I think so too, like, even that documentation on the podcast is like,
that's cool.
People to like understand that.
So like your content, like you said, you had somebody who chops up or edits your podcast, right? And puts that out. I got my man Brandon too, who does like my editing and stuff. Do you do anything else? Like, I feel like I haven't seen on YouTube you doing like clips of your podcast or anything like that. Like, what's your strategy for like, content, right? In general.
Yeah. So, I mean, I've approached it many different ways over the years. Like right now where I'm focused is like definitely more on YouTube. I'm like, I've spent the last 3 years, like not really focused too much on YouTube, even though I've known it's always been important and I slacked off there. Like I've focused on Instagram and just the podcast platform, like getting my interviews out there. More recently, I think I started putting out more content like December. And I'm putting all my podcasts on there, the thumbnails and like the making sure the titles are on point. And like I've had two really, I guess you could say like semi-viral videos when I interviewed Tyler Winklevoss right before the big Bitcoin boom. They got like 300,000 views on one video and like 200 on the other one, which is like 500,000 views. So, and I went from like 1,500 subscribers, which is nothing, to like almost 8,000 now. Right. And like my goal by the end of the year is to have 100,000 subscribers on YouTube because
I'm sure you can do it. YouTube just takes effort, like a little extra effort, right?
Yeah, exactly. But I've focused on like Instagram as a platform. Like my whole goal over the past 3 years, like as from a leverage point, like when I first got on social, I'm like, okay, how can I get verified? Because that will allow me to be seen easier and it has that extra leverage point.
Yeah, how'd you do that? How'd you get verified?
It all comes down to strategy and just having the right person that can hook it up and like the PR and like nowadays it's way harder for like I've gotten like no other people verified. I just happen to be right time, right person, right connection, epic. But when it comes to the strategy of posting and on the podcast and on YouTube, like my whole thing, like even with my username change, I think last year in May, I switched it to @Casey.
I saw that. I was going to ask you about that actually. It came up. That's so cool. @Casey. Like,
it's so OG.
Did you have to like get someone else to like, did you have to find the original @Casey and DM them and be like, hey, it was like have it?
It was like a 3-year process of like, I had @Casey Adams 1 for the longest time. And that was just the domain I had. I connected with @Casey and, everyone wants their OG name. It'd be impossible to get because it's like only like the OG users got them. Right. Yeah. So we ended up talking. He's like, I would never sell this. I would never sell this. And like 2 years goes by. I'm still just following up with him like every 6 months, just seeing what's up. Last March it was like last March, almost a year ago now. He hits me up and he's like, "Oh, yo, like, do you still want this username?"
He needed some money
absolutely.
Or something?
I have no idea. But, I talk him down from whatever the number he wanted. Yeah. I literally buy the page for $1,700.
That's worth it, man. That's worth it.
Such a steal. Yeah. And get the page, do the username swap, which is a whole thing in and of itself. And then I got the OG name. And my buddy, Kieran, my business partner, we were actually talking about that yesterday because he was with someone that identified me as like, oh, like at Casey, like, yeah, like, oh yeah, I know him, like knowing my username, right? And like even when I interviewed the COO of Shopify, Harley, he has at Harley on Instagram, and like the first 5 seconds of the interview, he was like, dude, you're at Casey, bro. He's like, I have so much respect. I'm at Harley. And like, we hit it off, right? Cause it's like these funny things. So, like I tried to always, like, talking back to your point of like social media, I always try to figure out how I can have leverage to connect with people easier. I never wanted to be the most famous and the most amount of followers and like try to make clickbaity type of stuff for the hype. Like I wanted to best position myself where if I want to get in touch with someone or DM someone or just like have my personal brand dialed in. And, you know, on Instagram, that's the OG username now. And the fact that it's verified, it allows me to book interviews easier.
Yeah, definitely.
And for me, like, that's just like how my brain has worked from the start. But from a like actual content perspective, you know, sometimes on Instagram more recently, like I haven't been like, I know I could be posting more clips on Instagram and going hard on Instagram, but I'm really in a building mode right now. Like we're raising money right now. We're about to launch our MVP. Like I'm not as focused on like, let me put out 100 clips on Instagram over the next 30, 45 days. And even though I know it's important, but I don't like to like spread myself thin. Like I'd rather not post as much right now and post things that are meaningful. Like this whole NFT drop as well. Like, you know, I've been posting pictures with Jacqueline, my girlfriend, and we're doing our thing. But then this NFT thing came about, and now I can tap into my platform and utilize it, and it's epic. And now it's like, oh, you haven't posted in a while. This is sweet. Like you just drop this on us. The next thing I'll drop, maybe it's like, boom, here's an article from whatever when we raised $1 million. Like, so for me, like the content right now is like YouTube oriented. Obviously, the podcast. My Instagram, I look at as like I've positioned myself exactly how I want. I don't need to be the most famous on there and post 3 times a day. Like, even though
meaningful, you said meaningful.
Yeah.
I kind of like that. It's like the opposite of Gary Vee, who says like post 100 pieces of content in a minute or whatever. Like,
but, and I also like really like agree with that. And I know
it's a different strategy. It's a different strategy.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think like I've changed my strategy immensely. Like I used to post so much, but like right now where I'm at, like mentally and in business and where I want to go, like I best position myself on Instagram. I'm putting out a lot of content on YouTube. I want to build that platform so I can really have an audience on there. And the podcast is its own animal. You know, and I've dabbled in all the different platforms, TikTok and Twitter and everything. But I mean, it's at the end of the day, like social media to me, I don't want it to just consume so much of my time, even though it may take time. And I've put in hours to build the brand and it's just the beginning, but I want my real life, like real life moves to build my brand for me. Like when I started building my brand, it was about the content and about, you know, when I was 16 doing book reviews and just like maintaining and putting out so much content. Nowadays it's like, yo, like I'm working, I have things that I'm building and like that itself will make your personal brand. And that's how I like to approach it.
I think you build up enough credibility where like you could just do you, and like whatever you're doing is what you're doing, and like that's kind of cool because like and that if you can get to that point, I mean that's awesome. Like I think you're there. And, like, do you feel like you're like so many young people that get famous, they just like lose their mind, like Macaulay Culkin or like Lindsay Lohan. Like being famous when you're young is like, I think maybe bad for your brain. It seems like you obviously have the right attitude, but like, do you feel that? How's it feel?
I mean, I'm definitely not famous in any sense. I think there's like a community where like, you know, with whether that's podcasting or if I meet someone and then they look me up and they see that everyone I've interviewed, it's like, oh, like you've been doing cool stuff. Right. But like compared to someone like the Bryce Halls of the world that have 30 million followers and like are so much out there, where they're like, they might walk around LA and like get noticed everywhere. Like I don't get noticed rarely. And
do you?
I mean, I have in the past for sure. Like absolutely. Especially like when I would go to a lot of these events, right? Like FedEx Growth Con and like the entrepreneurial type events for sure. But nowadays, like especially with COVID, there's not many events going on. I've just been like dialed in. Like,
do you like it?
Well, I love meeting people, man. Like the in-person connections and talking to people and shaking hands and like people wanting to get to know me. Like it's like an energy that you can't explain, right? Like, I love it. You know, at the end of the day, like
I feel like everyone loves it. It's such a cool thing. Like I get DMs sometimes and messages like, I love your podcast. And it's like the best feeling ever. Like if someone said it in person, I feel like it's even cooler. So,
totally.
I feel like everyone probably loves it, but, Yeah, dude, you're the man. Last question. Who's your dream guest? You've probably been asked it, but I couldn't find it. So who is it?
Yeah. I thought about it a lot. I would say right now, like I want to interview Elon Musk, hands down, 100%. And like I'm like a degree of separation away. Like I've interviewed his mom, I've interviewed his sister.
His mom. That's the very close degree of separation.
Like my whole goal is like one day I need to just run into Elon Musk, and my pitch is, Elon, I've interviewed your mom and your sister on my podcast. Like if you were me, how would you go about having me on my show? So it's like, my whole goal is to like when they run into him, right? Obviously that's very far off, but that's I would say that's my dream guest. Not even because he's like the most hype, but so I want to talk to I want to talk to him about like I would really over prepare for that interview, and I would want to bring up questions that I know would be like news headlines, like what was Elon Musk's favorite this, or like what are things
you could literally move markets in that podcast.
Yeah, like exactly. It's like like indica or sativa, what do you smoke, right? Like things that like are funny and personal, but also like obviously talking about his like how his brain works and getting to Mars. But like people, those are the questions that everyone asks him when he does interviews. I think the thing with Joe Rogan was so special was because like obviously they end up smoking a joint and it's hilarious and it turns into a meme. Like that really sparked something in my brain when I was like, he made him like Joe Rogan made Elon Musk such a human being that's normal during that interview, which I think was epic for the people to see, where I want to interview him, do it in person, and just like, whether it's 15 minutes or 30 minutes, whatever it is, like be very personal and ask questions that people have never asked him before, because everyone's focused on the Mars and the, everyone talks about that with him. And he has like the most incredible interviews with epic reporters that you can listen to that. I'd want to, get super personal and
represent the young, the rise of the young.
Yeah.
Dude, I will listen to that podcast. I promise you. That would be epic. And dude, you are very close. His mom, like Larry King's son, Elon Musk's mom, like you got that. You're going to get him. I
appreciate it. We'll see. We'll look back on this and
I'll play this clip when you get him on, and then that'll be awesome. Dude, that's been great. I've been interested in you, like trying to have you on just because I see you like so cool and have cool guests on. I have such a good eye for like good conversations. And
thank you, Sean.
Yeah, it's a great moment for my podcast to have you on. It's been a pleasure. And
absolutely. And
thanks for joining. You want to do the thing where like where can everyone follow you and stuff like that?
Yeah.
At Casey, at Casey, right?
On Instagram at Casey for sure. And yeah, I mean, my website is CaseyAdams.com. I'm on Twitter. I'm on all the other platforms, but for everyone that listened all the way through this podcast, definitely take a moment if they can check out my podcast. We talked about the Larry King interview, all these different interviews, like, taking a moment to like check out actually like what I've been doing the last couple of years. Like that's the most important thing to me. So like, allow people to really see the questions I ask and the people that I talk to, and if it's of value to them, epic. And that's the whole reason why I do it. So definitely check me out. It's just at Rise of the Young, on Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, everything.
And maybe bid on his NFT.
Let's go.
All right, man. Thanks for talking to you. See you later.
Thanks, Sean.
Peace.